All right, it's the end of the week, and what better way to close it out and head into the weekend than with a Morning Pitt Mailbag. So that's what we're going to do today, take questions from you about everything going on, Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Friday. It's the end of the week. I feel like we should sing that Rebecca Black song, but we won't. Maybe next time we will. Maybe I'll replace... Maybe from now on, the Morning Pitt logo that plays the old ramp-up guitar, maybe I'll replace that with Rebecca Black singing Friday, just for these Morning Pitt videos. That'd be classic, and then I would probably get sued or something like that. But we're here. It's a Friday. It's time for the Morning Pitt Mailbag. We take questions from Pitt fans on Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You see the website below. That's not a link, that's an image, but you can type those letters and symbols right into your web browser and go check out the site, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, for all the Pitt sports coverage that you can handle. Football, basketball, recruiting, it's all right there. Panther-Lair.com and message boards to talk to other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Panther-Lair.com. And of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's where we do these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We do our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. And we do our post-game show after every Pitt football game. And we'll do them after some basketball games too. Still kind of planning that out. We'll see how the schedule works. But that means we'll be live tomorrow after the Florida State game. Pitt-Florida State, it's a 3:30 kickoff at Acrisure Stadium tomorrow afternoon. And we'll be live when that game ends. Now, that might be 9 o'clock. That might be 9:30. That might be 10 o'clock when we actually go live. Game should end around 6:30 or 7. We'll see what time we actually go live. We hope to get on the air, so to speak, by 9 o'clock, but we never really know. If you want to make sure that you don't miss any of the live streams, though, if you want to make sure you don't miss the post-game show, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And while you're at it, like this video as well. But if you subscribe, then you won't miss any of our videos or our live streams, and that's the important thing. The other thing that's important is that you look good as a Pitt fan, and the best way to look good as a Pitt fan is to head over to Home Field and get some of their sweet Pitt gear. You might be disappointed about Pitt football, but look, Pitt basketball looks pretty good, and they have some really, really excellent basketball-themed apparel at homefieldapparel.com. You have to check out their Pitt collection. It's some of the best Pitt stuff you're going to find. It's on high-quality t-shirts and sweatshirts and joggers and dad hats and bomber jackets. If they add any more items, I'm not going to be able to say them all in one breath. It's that good. The collection is just that good, and it's quintessentially Pitt, classic Pitt. I don't even want to say vintage because it makes it feel old. It's a classic look. It's instantly recognizable as Pitt, and there's some of the coolest designs and logos and graphics and marks that you're going to find anywhere. It's at homefieldapparel.com. And remember, if you use the promo code LAIR23, LAIR23 on your first order, you'll get 15% off. So you're going to get some of the best Pitt gear you'll find, and you'll get it at a discount if you use the promo code LAIR23, LAIR23 at homefieldapparel.com. So go check that out right now. Now, you know the deal. You know what we do with the mailbag. We take questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. The Between Fifth and Forbes message board is one of our premium message boards. It's for subscribers to Panther-Lair.com. And every week, usually midweek, we ask, hey, who's got questions? And then we answer as many of those questions as we can right here every Friday on the Morning Pitt Mailbag. We had one left over from last week that I actually wanted to get to. I like it. It's from 121 Rum. I don't think I answered this question last week. Sometimes we have leftover questions one week, and I can't remember which ones we actually answered. When we get to the next week and I go back, I'm like, oh, do I have any questions I need to wrap up on or anything I need to, want to catch up and get the last few questions from last week's thread. And I can't always remember which questions we ended on, but I'm pretty sure we didn't answer this. 121 Rum asks, what's more likely, purely to generate controversy, Pitt making the Sweet 16 or Pat Narduzzi going to Michigan State after the season? And you're asking that question, or rather I'm answering that question shortly after watching the Pitt basketball team in its exhibition game against UPJ, which, as we said on the Morning Pitt yesterday, we were not going to overreact to, and then we proceeded to do exactly that and overreact to Pitt beating UPJ in an exhibition game. And so now I'm going to answer the question of what's more likely, Pitt going to the Sweet 16 or Pat Narduzzi going to Michigan State. And I'm going to say, well, it's the Sweet 16. What's funny is I would have said that answer last week too. Even if we hadn't watched the UPJ game, even if it was before the Georgetown closed scrimmage and we found out about Pitt beating Georgetown and Ishmael Leggett scoring 20 and all the things that sort of came out from that game, I think I would have still picked Pitt going to the Sweet 16. Now, make no mistake about it, I am not picking Pitt to go to the Sweet 16. There are a lot of questions I need to get answered about this team. That I need to see how this team handles adversity. And I need to see this team when they're coming down the stretch, needing to make big baskets and needing to make big shots. The shots that, last year Jamarius Burton made, Nelly Cummings made. I need to see who's going to step up and make those shots. Blake Hinson made a lot of those shots, but he's back. You need to replace some of those other clutch shots. Bub Carrington looked awesome on Wednesday night. There's no question about it. And I think his ceiling, I think, is sky high. I think he's going to be really good this year. But when it's clutch time, when it's late in the game against Syracuse or Duke or whoever you want, Louisville, maybe Louisville is not a good example. I wonder if Louisville would beat UPJ. Anyway, I digress. If it's late in the game, and it's a clutch moment, and you need a big basket, you need a Jamarius Burton level play like he made so many times last year, is Bub Carrington up to the task? And I'm not saying he's not, and I'm not saying he's the only guy who has to be up to the task. I think Ishmael Leggett needs to be up to the task. I think Zach Austin can be up to the task. Obviously, Blake Hinson, who we mentioned. But is Bub Carrington up to the task? That's something we're going to need to see from him and find out about him. And I'm not sitting here saying I don't think he can do it. I'm just saying we need to see him do it. So I'm not going to go so far as to predict that they're going to the Sweet 16 or something like that. I think this team is very interesting. As I keep saying, I think they're going to be really exciting. I think they're going to be really fun to watch. I think they have a lot of very, very interesting pieces, but we need to see how it all comes together. That said, I just don't think Pat Narduzzi's leaving here after this season. I just don't think he's going to Michigan State or any other place. I think he's coming back to Pitt next year to keep working and try to rebuild what went wrong this year, what fell apart this year. And there's another question in the mailbag that is sort of along those lines of, this year and going forward, and we'll get to it. But I think Pat Narduzzi very much believes he can fix this and can rebuild it after a pretty big step back in 2023. And I think he knows some of the things that he's going to have to do in order to rebuild it. But I don't see him sort of breaking off and running away from it. I think he's going to stick around. So if you ask me which one I think is more likely to happen, I would say, it's probably the Sweet 16, if only because I think Narduzzi leaving is less likely to happen. So it's sort of two sides of the same coin, but I think you understand my point. All right, but the good question, I wanted to get to that one. I appreciate it. All right, Pitt Chag says, your pick for the number of Pitt basketball signees for 2024 in the early signing period next week, over under 1.5. So that's an interesting question. Pitt, not just Pitt, but NCAA basketball signing period, National Letter of Intent signing period. Remember, it goes a full week, and it starts next, I think, Wednesday. It goes Wednesday to Wednesday, November 8th through the 15th. Basketball does 2 signing periods, one in the fall, one in the spring. They're both a week long. It's not nearly the event that National Letter of Intent signing day is for football, even though signing day really is just the start of a signing period in football, in both sports. Football used to have just one signing period that started on the first Wednesday in February and actually went through the end of March, but everything happened on that first Wednesday with a rare exception, like a guy like Terrell Pryor. Everybody signed on that day anyway, so it was just signing day, sort of ignoring the fact that it was the start of a signing period. Anyway, basketball's got their first signing period coming up here next week. And right now they've got one commitment for the class of 2024. It's Brandon Cummings. I think a big-time prospect, obviously the younger brother of Nelly Cummings, a guy who, Brandon I'm talking about, his, I think, reputation, I think his ceiling, his sort of view as a prospect and his potential has only climbed since the summer, through the summer and really since the summer. And I think he looks better and better. And right now he's the only player committed to Pitt in the 2024 recruiting class. I think they'll take more than just Brandon Cummings. In theory, I think when you look at the roster, you you might not, if everybody comes back, you're not going to have a lot of open scholarship spots. Now, we know that not everybody's going to come back, and so there'll be more than just 1 or 2 spots available. But they're sitting right now, when you don't know how many guys are coming back, you're not, you don't know how much room you're really going to have to work with. In the room that you have to work with, are you going to invest that all in high school prospects, or are you going to try and get a split, kind of like they did this year, of a handful of transfers and a handful of recruits? So there's a lot of sort of moving pieces. I would say right now, I would take the under on 1.5. I think Cummings will be the only player who signs with Pitt next Wednesday, or at some point in that period that starts next Wednesday. But things can always change, and I think there are probably some other targets sort of lurking out there who could be potential candidates. But my guess is that they'll just sign Cummings, and you'll see the real action in the spring. Particularly as the coaches have a clearer picture of what the roster looks like, what the returning roster looks like, and how many scholarships they're actually going to have available to give. Pitt for Life 34 says, any under-the-radar vibe on this recruiting cycle's lost potential? Any names that likely don't stick? So we're back to talking about the football recruiting class. It's hard to get a real gauge on who's going to stick, who's not. They have 21 commitments right now, according to the Rivals database. That still includes Tayshawn Banks, who we've said since the summer we kind of don't expect to end up signing in the class. Out of the other 20 guys, I mean, everybody seems to be saying the right things and content with where they are, but odds and history would say that at least 1 or 2 are going to drop off of that list before we get to signing day in the first, or wherever, the third week in December, I guess it is. So, I don't have a specific name for you. I think those things sometimes stay under the radar until it's, they're quiet until they're not. But I can't sit here and say that out of those other 20 guys, I expect all 20 to sign. I mean, I think it's just sort of inevitable. It's not a question of whether anybody will back off or flip or get let go or whatever it is. There's any number of ways that a guy can come off the commitment list. It's more just a matter of who it'll be rather than whether there will be any. I think there probably will be some, just not sure who. Atwood409 says, what has been your biggest snafu covering Pitt and challenging experience did you learn the most from? That's an interesting question. I feel like I screwed up a lot. and there's probably a lot of things that maybe wouldn't stand out. It's that old I'm my own biggest critic type of thing, and that's not some weird tout or clout or something like that. It's just there have been a lot of things, over the years, when you do something for 18 years where I look back and I just sort of cringe. I'm like, oh, what were you doing? Why would you have asked that question? Why would you have written it that way? Why would you have said that on the message board? Why would you have suggested this? Why would you have predicted this? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? And there are new additions to that, to that file pretty much every year, every month. I'll tell you though, I mean, you want one that sticks out and maybe it just sort of feels recent and fresh, but I look back on this so often and really, not just cringe, but I almost get angry with myself. And there's no apology that can be made for it. There's no explanation, no rationalization, but the Dior Johnson thing last year, I mean, that was bad. That was a major mistake. And just to recount, there was a police file discovered of Dior Johnson being arrested, or charges filed, I guess, against Dior Johnson. Reach out to people at Pitt, make contact with people at Pitt. Phone call I get back says that, or text message first, that's not our Dior Johnson. Wrong Dior Johnson. That's not our Dior. And so I go with it. It's people I trust, people I think are not going to lead me astray intentionally or otherwise. And I don't think it was intentionally led astray. I'll say it in a second. I don't think it was people that I trust. They say, oh, okay, they're telling me it's not their Dior. Okay, good. I'm going to put that on Twitter. I'm going to put it on the message board. Nope, wrong Dior Johnson. And ultimately, the people I talked to, and I later got a phone call about this, the person I talked to was literally standing right next to Dior at the time. because it was just that the files were charged, or that the files were, the charges were filed, excuse me, not that he was actually arrested. So to that person, it was like, oh, he's not arrested. He's standing right next to me. Wrong Dior. Well, okay, that's plausible. And like I say, it's people you trust. But even with people you trust, you need to have some amount of discernment. You have to have a critical eye on things. You have to question things. If something seems really, really off, even if someone you trust and you have every reason to trust, and someone I would continue to trust to this day, if someone you trust, even if someone you trust tells you A is B, but or at least there's a voice in your head that says A can't be B. It just can't. That doesn't mean you automatically distrust this other person. You automatically question what they're telling you. Well, no, it doesn't mean you question what they're telling you. It doesn't mean you automatically dismiss what they're telling you, but you do question it. You need to think about it a little bit more critically. And so that was probably a lesson I was learned, and that was last year. And I mean, I could go off on excuses and I was doing this, I was really busy, I was in the middle of doing this or doing that, and I blah blah blah. No, there's no excuse. I mean, the job is to disseminate information accurately, quickly, but accurately, and with as much information and context and background as possible. And in that situation, I dropped the ball. I just tried to be as fast as possible, not because I was trying to break news or be the first one, but just because I was in the middle of doing other things, and it was at a point. I mean, it was like a late Friday afternoon or something. I think we were going camping, and I'm trying to get the kids out the door. But here I'm offering excuses, and that there's no excuse for it. That was a major screw up, and some lessons, some valuable lessons were learned. I still think about that one. And when I hear people make jokes about it, which they absolutely should make jokes about it because it was a pretty big screw up, snails on the chalkboard a little bit, but I'll own it. I'll wear that one for sure. Pitt is number one, says, we know the offense is atrocious, but what happened to this defense? It's nowhere near the standard of previous years. I mean, I think there's a couple things with the defense. I think you have youth. I think youth is a big part of it here, and experience is a big part of it here. You think about what they lost. And this is not to rationalize or make excuses, because this is an indictment as well. But you think about what they lost. I mean, they lost an All-American in defensive tackle in Kalijah Kancey. They lost draft picks right up the middle of the gut from Kancey to Servassier Dennis to Brandon Hill and Eric Hallett. That's a lot to replace. Not just the numbers not just the number of players, but the level of play from those four guys. Never mind the defensive ends. We'll get into the defensive ends in a second. Just the level of play from those four guys and the impact those four guys right up the middle had on every game was huge. And that's not easy to replace. And it doesn't necessarily mean that this year's players are bad players, but they're not on the level of those guys. Not yet. And I mean, in the case of your 6-year senior defensive tackles and Shane Simon, this is their last year anyway, so it's not like they're growing and going to grow into that level. I mean, Javon McIntyre, PJ O'Brien, Donovan McMillan, those guys can grow into that level and play well at safety. But you have a drop-off there. And then the defensive end position is just not productive. But it wasn't all that productive last year either. And so you weren't getting a lot of that. But those, the DNs last year were able to create opportunities for the linebackers and maybe benefit from some of the attention paid to Kalijah Kancey. I mean, I think you just had a lot of roster turnover, a lot of personnel turnover, and the result is that it's been really inconsistent. And we can debate whether or not there's been enough progress. It's hard to say after they give up 530 yards and 58 points or 51 or whatever. No, actually, I mean, what they actually give up on defense? They gave up 5 touchdowns. Right, because there were 2 special teams touchdowns and a pick 6. Is that right? I mean, it doesn't matter. They got gashed. There's no question about it. They got beat by the pass and they got beat by the run. And now they're facing a huge challenge this weekend too, against Florida State. But I mean, that's what I would say. I think there was a lot of personnel turnover, and you're experiencing the growing pains. which we talked about all offseason. You know what I mean? We talked about all summer. We talked about it all spring, that there were going to be growing pains for this defense, and we're seeing it. And unfortunately, through Game 8, we're still seeing it. And that's maybe the biggest problem. Thunder Pit Road says, is there a point in this season when the analysis switches from just one terrible season that programs like Pitt occasionally have to something underneath the surface that's a systemic problem with the program? I mean, for me, no. But I sort of characteristically hold on too long to things. Like if you look at my fantasy football team, this is a bad example. Nobody wants to hear anybody talk about fantasy football. I always hold on to guys way too long. I always expect guys to break out of slumps or bounce back well past the point of them actually breaking out of slumps or bouncing back. We have a keeper league. I keep guys too long. I hold on too long, expecting to, you know, the glory of the past to be reclaimed. And so I might not be the best expert on this, but I do think a lot of the things we all believed about this program in the spring and the summer, whether it's in the recruiting, whether it's in the culture of the program, whether it's in the foundation of the program and how it's been built over the last 9 years. I saw somebody on the message boards earlier this week talking about, you know, boy, everybody was so excited and, you know, about, you know, development during the spring. Well, the reason everybody was excited about development and recruiting and evaluation in the spring is because they just had the most draft picks of any ACC team over the last 3 years. Like that was bona fide. You know what I mean? Like that was provable and evidence-based that this program has a history. Under Pat Narduzzi, this program has a history of identifying talent and developing that talent and ultimately winning with that talent. And for the better part of the last 8 years, that's what has happened. Now, this year it took a step back. This year it took a big step back, and there are a lot of reasons for why it took a step back. Some, you know, and I mean, and we've gone over them. We've talked about them a lot. I don't think there's a systemic problem within the program. However, there is a path that has taken the program to the point it is currently in. And it has taken the team to the point it is currently in. And Pat Narduzzi needs to identify which spots along that path where they took the wrong turn. And where they went left when they should have went right. They zigged when they should have zagged and all. I mean, you can blah, blah, blah. We could do this for like 10 minutes. He needs to find those points and correct those mistakes. And he needs, it's 3 parts here. 3 parts, all right? He needs to identify where those problems happened, where the wrong turn was taken. He needs to correct it. And then he needs to learn from it. And this is not to say that he didn't learn from things in the past or whatever. I feel like he has sort of progressively, you know, offensive coordinators a great sort of point where I think, you know, hire by hire, each hire has been sort of a reaction to the previous hire. And somebody on the board said, you know, I wish he'd be more proactive than reactive. And that's understandable. But I think there's evidence of learning in being reactive that way of like, okay, I have this guy who does this thing. You know what? We need to be better at this other thing. Sean Watson, that's great. You had 2 1,000-yard rushers, but we can't pass the ball to save our life, and we have a young quarterback who needs to be developed. I need someone who can develop a passing game and develop a quarterback. Watson's out. Mark Whipple's in. Mark Whipple gets to the end of his time. Okay, that was great when we had a Heisman Trophy finalist and a Biletnikoff Award winner to throw the ball a bajillion times a game, but we think we can be more effective as an offense, particularly in light of Kenny Pickett's departure. We can be more effective as an offense with a more balanced approach. It's reactive, but I think it's sort of reactive learning. It's learning as a reaction or reaction as learning. And I mean, the debate, of course, and maybe it's not even a debate anymore, but the ongoing discussion is not whether the move toward a balanced offense was the best idea, although no, actually there's a debate about that, but it's about how it was executed and how he went about whether or not Frank Signetti was the right guy to hire to, you know, institute that change. Excuse me. That's what Narduzzi needs to look at. And his if he makes a change at offensive coordinator this offseason, his next hire will be a reaction to the experience of the last 2 years. Understandably so. You know, I think when one hire is a reaction to the performance of the previous hire. It's reactive, but it's also learning. What did you learn from these 2 years? You react to that information and that learning and make your next hire based on that. So I don't think there's a systemic problem in the program. I think this is one of those years that you have sometimes, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not of your own doing. And I think there's also a path out of it. But this is a very, very important offseason for Pat Narduzzi, and some of the decisions he makes this offseason are going to resonate over the coming years and probably go a long way in determining maybe how many of those years there are. So we'll see. All right, great questions this week. I really appreciate everybody who contributed a question, and apologize if we didn't get to your question. We'll try and wrap up some of those other questions in next week's mailbag. Remember, if you want to have a question read here on the Morning Pitt Mailbag, you can check our thread every week at midweek on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board. We put up a call for questions for the mailbag. We always get great questions like we had this week, so we appreciate everybody who contributed. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then head over and check out homefieldapparel.com for the best pick gear. Promo code LAIR23, LAIR23, to get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. Don't forget the live show tomorrow night after the game. We'll be live probably around 9 o'clock, 9:30, somewhere around there. I'll let you know a specific time, but you can always find that out if you turn on your notifications right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So we will be live after the game tomorrow to talk about Pitt, Florida State. Can't wait. Should be an interesting afternoon at Acrisure Stadium. Let's say that, and we'll see what happens tomorrow night. So thanks for watching these Morning Pitt videos all week. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And we will catch up with you tomorrow night for the post-game show right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.